Hi everyone, and welcome to Let's Get Technical. Today, we'll be learning a bit about Adobe After Effects, a fantastic video editing software for creating motion graphics and visual effects. During today's session, I will show you how to make a title intro using a custom logo using both Adobe Illustrator and Adobe After Effects. The Meaford Public Library has access to these apps, as well as all the other apps included in Adobe Creative Cloud, thanks to the generous donation by the Rotary Club of Meaford. Now that we have reopened to the public, you are more than welcome to visit the library and give these programs a try for yourself. We'll begin by creating a logo for the library. We'll start by opening the Creative Cloud desktop, then we can access the Web tab, and then open Adobe Stock. Let's search for a book icon. Now we can just scroll until we find one that we like. The Meaford Public Library has access to 750 Adobe Stock assets a month, which you are able to use when you access Adobe Stock from one of the library's laptops. This one looks good. We can download it by hovering over the image, then clicking this blue License button. Now I will just ensure it is set to download as a vector file, as we'll be opening it in Adobe Illustrator for the next step. Then we can select the Download button. Now we can see that it's downloading on the bottom left of the screen. Now that it's finished downloading, we will return to the Creative Cloud desktop, then navigate to the Desktop tab. Here we can open Illustrator. This is where we will create the logo. First, we can open that AI file that we just downloaded by going to Open, Downloads, then clicking on the file. We can just hit Yes here. Personally, I only want this middle book for my logo, so I can copy it by right-clicking on this arrow here and then selecting the lasso tool. Now I can just click and drag around the icon and then hit Ctrl-C on the keyboard to copy it. Now let's create a new project by selecting File, then New. Let's make the project a custom size of 1280 by 720 pixels, because that's the size of a video that I recorded of the library, which we will see later this session. Now we can just hit Create. We can paste the copied icon by hitting the button Ctrl and V, as in Victor, on the keyboard. To resize the icon, simply hit this arrow, then click and drag on the corner of the box. To learn more about how to use Adobe Illustrator, please check out the previous Let's Get Technical session where I talk about it. You can find a link to that video in the description. For this logo, let's find some new text using Adobe Font. To access that, we can go to Type, then More from Adobe Fonts. In the sample text, I'll just write Meaford Public Library. So now when we're looking at what font to choose, we can see what it would look like for those words. There are different styles of font you can filter on the left. Let's look at typewriter font. This Chandler 42 font looks good, so we'll just click on it to activate it. We now have the option of activating all the fonts in the family or just choosing a font individually. Let's just activate the medium style font. Now let's go back to Adobe Illustrator, and we can add some text by clicking the text icon. Then in the Properties panel, let's change the font type to Chandler 42. Let's set the font size to 72. Now I'll type Meaford Public Library. The next step is to click on the Selection tool, then click and drag a rectangle around the book to select all the lines of the book. Then we can hit Group so all the pieces of the book icon are grouped together. Now let's hit this horizontal Align Center button to center the entire book to the page. Repeat this step with the text to line it to the center as well. Let's make our logo the color white. To do that, we can click on the text, and then in the Properties panel on the right, we can select the box next to the word Fill. Here we can select the color white. Now one issue is that the book and the text are all on one layer. We need them to be in separate layers for when we edit in After Effects. So to fix that, we can open the Layers panel by clicking Layers next to Properties at the top, and then we can cut the text by hitting Ctrl and X on our keyboard. Select the icon at the bottom with a square and a plus sign to create a new layer. Now let's select Layer 2 and paste the text. I'll temporarily change the fill color back to black to make it easier for us to see. As I hover over the book icon, we can see that it's highlighted. From that, we can now see that the text and the book have a nice space between them. We can click on the horizontal line center button again, and then change the fill color back to white for the text. Now we can save the logo by going to File, then Save As. I'll navigate to my After Effects folder, and then just name the file MPL Logo Example. We can say OK to the pop-up. Now let's exit out of Illustrator and the web browser. Finally, we can begin taking a look at After Effects. After Effects can be opened from the Creative Cloud desktop. Let's start by selecting this button on the left to create a new project. This is the After Effects workspace. In the middle, we have the project panel. Any media you import will go here. On the left is the Effects Controls panel, and as you add effects to the video clips, the effect details will appear here. On the right is the Composition panel. Here we can preview the project as we work on it. Then on the bottom is the Timeline and Render queue. This is where we'll edit the project and set the export details. Let's get started by clicking on this button that says New Composition from Footage. Here we can click on the MPL Logo Example illustration file that we just created. Now it's important here to double check that it is importing as a composition, as that will ensure it imports the logo as layers, rather than just one flat image. We can double click on the MPL logo example in the project panel to add it to the timeline. On the left, we can now see it has added the file as 2 layers. Because we used Illustrator to make our logo, we can now edit these different parts of the logo using After Effects without them interfering with one another. Let's right-click on the layers and select Rename to change their name. Let's name them Book and Text so it reminds us what each layer contains. Now hold Shift and click on Layer 1 and 2 so that way they're both highlighted. Now in the Composition panel, you can click and drag the entire logo to reposition it. Double-click in the Project panel to import more media. I'll import this video that I took of outside the library. Now we can drag and drop it from the Project panel to add it to the timeline. Now press spacebar to play the video. It looks like the logo clip continues even after the library clip has ended. To trim that clip, just go to the end of the timeline with your cursor and then click and drag the bar towards the left to shorten it. I'll click and drag the text in the Composition panel to slightly reposition it. Now let's add some effects. We'll begin by adding a transformation effect on the book. We're going to make it so the book slides from the bottom to the middle. Before we get started, you can use the sliding bar at the bottom of the screen to zoom in and out of the timeline. Next, click the sideways arrow on the book track. A drop-down menu will appear that says Transform. Click that arrow as well. Now we'll just click on the composition and move the book so it is barely shown at the bottom of the screen. Next, select the clock icon next to position to add a keyframe. A keyframe basically indicates that a change is happening at that point. Move the timeline so we're at 1 second, then click and drag the book so it's centered on the screen. Hold Shift while dragging to move it in a straight line. Here we can see that it automatically adds another keyframe. Now when we play the clip, we can see that the book moves from the bottom of the screen to the center as it transitions from one keyframe to the next. Now let's just shorten the text bar so that way the text doesn't actually appear in the video until 1 second in. Now when we hit play, we can see that the book moves upwards and the text doesn't appear until the book is in the center. Now let's edit the text. Let's make it so that way the text fades in. To do that, open the drop-down menu on the text layer. In Transform, there is an opacity option. This controls how see-through the text is. Set this to 0% so that way the text is not visible at all. Then click on the clock to add a keyframe, then move to the 2-second mark and change the opacity to 100%. Now when we take a look at the timeline, we can see that the text fades in. You can press spacebar to play your creation. Finally, let's add some effects to the library video. To add an effect, click on the layer, then select the Effects button at the top. Here you can find a variety of effects to choose from. Let's click on the option Blur and Sharpen, and then click the Fast Box Blur to add it. We can see the added effect in the Effects Control panel on the left, and if we open the drop-down menu, we can see the effects above Transform. Click that arrow to open the effects list, and then open the Fast Box Blur to change the settings for that effect. Select the clock to add a keyframe at the start so there is no blur at the beginning. Then go to the 1 second mark and set the blur radius to 15. Hit play. Now we can see that the background clip now has a blur effect. It may be nice if we can see a bit more of the building before it blurs though, so let's change it so the effect does not occur until later. To do that, hold Shift and click on both the keyframes. We can tell they are both selected as they're now both blue. We can just click and drag them now, so that way they do not occur until later in the timeline. Let's set it so that way the keyframes are at 2 and 3 seconds. Since the first keyframe has a radius of 0, that means there won't be a blur for anything before that keyframe, and the change will only happen between the keyframes. All that's left is to export the video. Before we do that, we need to make sure all the bars are set to the same finish point. We need to shorten the work area bar, which is the bar located above all the others, so that way it finishes at the same time as the other tracks. You can also click and drag this bar that's located above the timeline to zoom into the timeline. Then to export it, select File, then Export, then Add to Render Queue. You can click on the text to change the file name. We'll leave it as MPL Logo Example. When using Render Queue, you can only render as an AVI file. To render it in another format, you must use Media Encoder. When done, hit the Render button on the right to export your video. And there we go! After Effects makes a little sound when it's done exporting. Let's go to the After Effects folder in my Documents to see the finished video. And ta-da! We've created our own little intro using multiple effects. We can now save the project by selecting File, then Save. Let's name it MPL Example. You can click the house icon to return to the After Effects menu. Here you can find a variety of tutorials for you to try in the Learn tab. This tutorial occurs in-app, and it's actually basically the tutorial I just walked you through. They provide you with a logo and a clip, and they walk you through all the steps in the app. So if you want to give this tutorial another try, feel free to come to the library and give it a whirl. If you scroll down, there are more tutorials for you to watch in the web browser. If you press the Home tab, it displays our recent projects. Here we can see the project we just saved. That's it for today. As you can see, After Effects has a variety of options and effects for you to play with as you create your videos. It also has Adobe Illustrator integration, making it very easy for you to edit your own intros, outros, credits, and even commercials. The options truly are endless. Thank you for tuning in to today's video, and I hope you have a great week.